That'd be funny. Good evening, everyone. I know it's so funny. I feel like I'm on some, TV drama from my childhood or something. But anyway, thank you very much for coming out this evening. And thank you, Nick, for coming. This is the official launch of the 8th Peter Ash thriller. Right.
Thank you. Thank you.
The Price You Pay. And I'm happy to say that Nick has been here once on video for all of them, right?
I think so. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Only during COVID we had to miss one.
But we did that virtual.
I know, that's what I said. Yeah, no, I know. So all books together. I absolutely love it. I had a phone call from Nick's publisher when his first book came out, and they said, we have this book about a guy who's living under a porch, and we're not entirely sure where it's going, but we think it's really good, and we haven't organized much for it, and so would you be willing to have him come out to Scottsdale? So we're always game for debut novels, love debut novels. So Nick appeared, right? And it was January then, if I remember.
Yeah, no, it's been January every year except for this year because I missed a year, as you may or may not be aware of. So then I lost my January slot. But, February is almost as good.
Actually, in some ways, probably better. The weather can be trickier in January. I say that as a person who grew up in Winnetka near Chicago, and you're living in Milwaukee,
Yeah.
so the larger issue might be just getting out of Milwaukee, right?
It doesn't really matter if it's winter when you leave Milwaukee, as long as you can leave Milwaukee.
Actually, we got an extra with Nick because you came out last year to talk to CJ, didn't you?
Yeah, to CJ
Right.
Box, and then a day later was JT
JT
Ellison, which was
right.
a bunch of fun, yeah.
So it was like a winter break for a person who didn't have a book he didn't really want to miss out. I love that. Right. So in our new book, The Price You Pay, it's freezing, and we're in Milwaukee. We're also in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So traveling about the Midwest. But before we go any further, you have people here from Milwaukee. How many of you are from Milwaukee? Wasn't that wonderful?
Wow.
I just love it. Look
That's
at
awesome. Well, Milwaukee adjacent.
a wise decision beating the weather and all. So I think that's really great. Although
really
we could
great.
have pretended that they all flew here just for this event instead of they were hiding out for better weather. But so it goes. Anyway, yes, Nick was at his home bookstore, Boswell's in Milwaukee, last night. How did that go?
It was pretty good. We had 180 people, something like that.
Oh, a small event.
Oh yeah, no, it was surprising in a really good way. And I was interviewed by Bill Schweigert, who I think you know. He wrote The Guilty One.
Mm-hmm.
And Bill is hilarious, but managed to be less profane than usual. He was in the Coast Guard, so I think that's just part of the thing.
Part of his shtick,
Yeah.
so to speak.
And it was a lot of fun. It was good. It's really nice to be back doing this again. I didn't realize quite how much I missed talking to readers and how much a part of my life that has become, and how much it fuels me for the many, many weeks and months spent in my office staring at a screen. So I really do appreciate your coming out on a rainy night.
I do too. I warned him, because generally Phoenicians are weather wimps, but now that I know that a lot of them are from Milwaukee, I understand why they're here. So how many of you, have all of you read all of Nick's books, or any of you new to Nick at all? You are. Well, I want to encourage you to read the first two. You're here tonight, but I think I love the concept in the first one, but the second book, Burning Bright, has what I still consider the best chase scene I have ever read. It's absolutely brilliant, and so if you enjoy tonight, I really recommend. We have some copies up there. It's just terrific.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so where are we with this book? Tell us whatever you'd like to tell us about.
Well, this is the
Maybe
book.
why it took you so long.
Well, it's actually all connected. So this is the book that readers have been asking me for a book kind of about Lewis, really since the beginning. Lewis first shows up in the first book. He's been in every book since, well, actually, he wasn't in the Iceland book, but he is such a favorite of fans, and so and I have sort of said, yes, I would like to do this, but I couldn't quite get there. And so for this one, Peter is usually right. Peter is gets in trouble or is trying to help somebody else who's in trouble, and things get bad enough that Peter needs to call Lewis in. And so in this book, it's actually the reverse. So Lewis is the one who's in trouble, and he ends up calling on Peter for help. So I get to reverse some of that stuff. But part of the challenge was that I thought a lot about Lewis's past life, which I've sort of hinted at. I sort of have known more or less what it is all along. But I started doing the math. And so if Lewis and his crew, and if you've read The Drifter, you've met Nino and Ray already. So if they were in business for 10 years, robbing drug dealers, basically, was what they did. And if they did 10 jobs a year, and if every job 5 people got killed, that's 500 people. So I had to kind of figure out, like, I didn't want to tone him down. I mean, he is, as Peter says, the most dangerous man he's ever met, right? Lewis is a real force. So I had to sort of figure out how to reconcile that with who Lewis is today, right? Lewis has become a family man. Lewis, in the first book, got to be reunited with his childhood sweetheart, and it was I don't know. I sort of came to this so that it was Lewis was sort of on a moral crusade. So I filled in Lewis's past a little bit more, and I gave Lewis some rules that he had devised for himself, sort of like rules of engagement in the Army. And some members of his crew are in line with that, and some not so much. So that's part of what Lewis has to deal with all along here. So that's sort of the, that was in part the challenge. I don't know what else I have to say about that. I don't know. But I don't know. The other challenge is when you shift gears. So I wrote I threw away 5 months worth of work. This is really why this thing took so freaking long. Because it just wasn't, I started writing about Lewis's past, and I couldn't get back into the present. I couldn't, I really enjoyed it, and it was really interesting, but I just couldn't sort of pull it back into a modern day Peter and Lewis book, which is really what my editor was expecting. So I threw it all away. I came to Tucson, and I asked all my writer friends if they'd ever had a book that died on the vine. And except for C.J. Box, pretty much everybody had. So that made me feel like not as bad.
I will interject here that to some degree, Lewis must remind you of Nate Romanowski. There are some real parallels there for C.J. Box. C.J. will be launching his new book here, as he has every single one of his books, which is now, whatever it is, 27, on Monday, February 26th. But we are going to move up to the United Methodist Church, which is up the road, not too far, because it'll be more comfortable. But I thought a lot when I was reading about Lewis, about Nate, because Nate was like Lewis with a bloody past and the whole bit. And then gradually he's acquired, people that he has to care about and protect. And that's true. Greg Hurwitz will be here next Tuesday with...
Orphan X.
Thank you. Yeah, Evan. Yeah. Orphan X. I always get him. I never know which one to call him. Is he Orphan Evan Smoke? But it's the same problem, is that, Evan now has... people that, remember how Superman would get in the phone booth? He would change from mild-mannered Clark Kent boy reporter, to Superman. And it was because if they knew he was Clark Kent, all the people that worked with him and all in Lois Lane would be endangered. So, how do you deal with that if you are the kind of guy that Lewis or Nate or whatever is, or Orphan X, and then you acquire people that you care about?
Right. Well, and there's the other problem, right? If you are a novelist and you want to create a hero who is an essentially decent person, right? Like Joe Pickett is one of the more decent human beings in crime fiction, right?
That's true. That's why we have Nate, who
doesn't
have the same moral scruples.
Nate doesn't have the scruples, and it means that Joe gets to stay a little bit clean, right? And Lewis serves the same purpose. And you can look at Spencer and Hawk. Elvis Cole and Joe Pike are a little bit different, but
Oh, do you remember in Dennis Lehane's early
I was
books?
just going to say
Bubba,
Bubba
Bubba
Rogowski.
was the guy.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, a lot of those secondary sleuths have morphed into, computer guys. I mean, they don't need to be muscles so much as their information backup.
Right.
But in a thriller, you can use those, but still, it helps to have muscle backup for your guy.
Sure. Well, and again, the problem with, again, the goal for me as a writer is I want Peter to have some of that kind of Midwestern goodness to him, right? He's been through these experiences, but he does need Lewis to, kind of show up and kick a little ass, just every once in a while, because Peter, you would lose his sympathy if he was that, whereas Lewis gets to be somebody else entirely. And Lewis gets to be a little mysterious and a little bit dangerous, and there is this sort of sex appeal piece of that as a character. And that was actually another challenge for me as a writer, was I was really afraid that if I actually gave you more about who Lewis was, that he would lose that mystery. But so that was sort of a needle to thread as well.
So I'm happy to say, since many of you are here from the Midwest, and we both are, that there's a sort of movement towards Midwest mystery at the moment. The middle of the country has been kind of ignored while, everybody's in Boston or Los Angeles or something. But, Ken Kruger has done very well. And there's a new woman, and we're down to one copy, so this is not a commercial pitch at the moment. But Amy Pease wrote a wonderful book called Northwoods, which is set in northern Wisconsin. And Kent, in fact, joined me to do her launch.
Oh, nice.
The virtual launch. And there's several writers now who are using Wisconsin. There's another one in Iowa whose name I can't remember. I think it's a neglected region, and I'm happy to see that there are now writers taking up, the Midwest as a landscape.
No, I agree, and I think that's I mean, Kent is obviously an enormously talented writer, but I think that's a big part of his appeal, is that he writes about this part of the country that doesn't get a lot of attention. And there are a whole bunch of people living here in the heartland, and there are a whole bunch of people who read books. So I think the New York publishers who have no idea what happens, anywhere, west of.
My husband, who grew up in New York, when I started the Poison Pen in 1989, I could not get a single publisher in New York to think that anyone who lived here read books. I'm telling you, it was a relentless campaign for like 2 years before, we got anywhere. And now, because of COVID and other things, they're kind of slipping back a little bit that way.
Oh, yeah.
Saying, oh, well, you can just do a virtual event, because they don't want to say nobody actually reads out west, and it all stops somewhere around Ohio to send authors and all.
More, I would say eastern Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Florida, they go up and down the East Coast or whatever. But I remember my husband saying to me, he said, I grew up in New York, and he said, I can tell you that people who live in New York see over the Hudson, all they see is California. And to a great
That's
degree,
a great line.
to a great degree, that's true.
Yeah.
And so it's going to take a little while to shake out Zoom was great, and it got us all through the pandemic. Doug Preston actually said last night, sitting next to me, that all bookstores closed during the pandemic. I sat up like, wait. No, I said there was at least one bookstore that didn't close during the pandemic. In fact, we just shifted all of our programming right into Zoom, which came along at the perfect moment. But it's not okay with me now if we're shifted into Zoom and we can't shift back. So I'm working on it.
No, because there's not a substitute for this.
No, exactly.
The booksellers I talk to about this stuff are like, nobody shows up for Zoom in the way they show up for this, or they're not paying attention, and they don't buy books from a Zoom, right? Which is important if you run a bookstore.
We can make that work, but the real difference is that if you're virtual audience watching this, it's like Netflix. I mean, it's better television if we're talking here in the bookstore with people than if we are two little squares on a screen. And for some, it's, unavoidable. It's not that I'm opposed to still doing some, but it's not okay with me if that's all we do. So I'm really glad to see you.
Likewise. This is always, I don't know, this is, we were talking in the back room. This is a really important place for a lot of writers. And I hope you understand the role that you play in this, in our lives, in this ecosystem. This is one of my, you know, favorite places in the world.
Well, thank you.
So I love to be here.
We actually, because we're a not-for-profit bookstore, meaning I do this for fun, but everybody else gets paid. Um, we are willing to host debut authors in a way that many bookstores can't afford or doesn't or won't do. So, you know, if I went through the list of all the authors whose every book has been here, which starts with Don Winslow and Michael Connelly and, you know, Lisa C. and just goes on forever, that's why. It's because when they first published, you know, we said, sure, love to. And that was true with you. As I said,
It
they
was.
called, here's this guy under a porch. You know, what are we going to do with him? Anyway, back to Lewis. So what I want to know is, did you decide on the diary device the first time around, or is this how you figured out that you could? This is the very beginning of the book, so no spoilers.
Yeah, if it's on the jacket flap, we're allowed to talk about it.
Right. Well, not necessarily all the way, but is that how you figured out how you could deal with Lewis in the past and Lewis in the present?
No, the notebooks thing. It had. Peter Lewis gets a text from one of the former members of his crew, named Upstate Wilson. And
It's not his actual name.
well, his actual name is Teddy, but in the bad old days he was known as Upstate because he lived in northern Wisconsin and everything was better upstate. Also, he may or may not have had an amphetamine problem, so he always was in an upstate. But so he sends Lewis sort of this distress signal, and so Lewis comes back from what he's doing, grabs Peter, and up they go into the teeth of a blizzard to kind of see what's what. And the upshot is that Teddy, in his last job, got shot in the head. And he survived, but he's different, right? So when you have a traumatic brain injury, it changes your personality a little bit. And he's trying to recover his lost memories. He's become sort of a gentler soul. Became a vegetarian. He refused to slap mosquitoes, which in northern Wisconsin, again, is quite a statement. Well, you want to be kind to all living creatures, right? But so as part of his rehabilitation, he has been sort of writing down all the things he remembers. And it turns out a lot of what he remembers are the jobs that he pulled with the heavy lifters, the crew. And, you know, the first rule of doing major crimes is you don't write it down. And so somebody has gotten wind of sort of who Teddy is, and they come in, and their goal is to kill him and to steal his notebooks. And then that's sort of the device that sort of powers us through the rest of the story. What information is in there? How do they, what damage can it do, et cetera, et cetera. And it was, this is a book where really everybody is at risk in a way that they really haven't been before.
Did you feel okay about putting Dinah and the kids and even June at risk? I wondered about that.
It was sort of the only the stakes had to be really high, and this had to be almost operatic. And I'm not a giant fan of books with sort of kids in peril. I'm a father. I sort of stopped reading all of that when my son was born. But I guess I did it in the first book as well. Like Miles and Charlie are at risk. But this is again kind of a different level, right? So I don't know. I don't know. I thought about it, but I kept going, I guess, is the
Well,
answer.
I'm not being critical. I just wondered if it was something, because, you're not actually that kind of guy. And so I wondered how you were dealing with that.
Well, so crime writers, as you know, are generally pretty nice people, and it's because we get to kill all these people on the page. We get to do terrible things in the world, and that sort of cleanses our psyche, and that allows us to,
All your murderous impulses come out on the page.
Exactly,
Is that what you're saying?
exactly.
Right.
And you
Right.
can't go to jail if you don't actually do it. So
That's true. So we're in Milwaukee. We go to northern Wisconsin, and then in attempting to work out who took the notebooks and what they're going to do with the information that Teddy has provided, we go down to Chicago. So I thought that, you haven't kept Peter in Milwaukee. He's moved around geographically.
Well, yeah, I don't. I mean, I've already done two books that were set entirely in Milwaukee, and I like moving Peter around. The second book, um, Milwaukee book, is The Breaker, and that was the pandemic. I wasn't going to get on a plane and go do research, so it was like, oh, I guess I'm writing another Milwaukee book. But I don't know. It's fun. Like I did want Peter to have a little bit of a home. The goal with this series is to have Peter sort of make progress toward a more complete life, from living in his truck or up in the mountains in a tent to now he's shacked up with his sweetheart. He's got some work that means something to him. I don't just want to write Milwaukee books. I would like to have him keep, because I like writing about other places, and I like going other places.
Well, I think with thrillers, you can't, Reacher's an extreme, never in the same place. But I do think you do need to move him around. I mean, there's a credibility problem if it's always taking on the evildoers in Milwaukee.
Right. Yeah. So I was talking to a Milwaukee cop not long ago, and I said, so is there organized crime in Milwaukee? And he just laughed and he said, no, there's only disorganized crime in Milwaukee.
Actually, that's not a bad book title, Disorganized Crime. You should think about that. That would be sort of fun if you had a kind of, Abbott and Costello bunch of bad guys that, and so.
Like the Dortmunder books.
Yeah, that might be.
You guys read Donald Westlake?
The late, great Donald Westlake.
Late, great Donald Westlake.
Marvelous author. Donald E. Westlake, actually, who also wrote under a different name. Patrick, what did he also write under?
Richard Stark?
Yeah. Richard Stark. He wrote darker books we were talking about Don Westlake. I couldn't remember, but it's Richard Stark was his other, wonderful
those are
books.
Fantastic.
They really are, yeah. So, you could do sort of Dortmunder thing, but no, why not? This is such a dark book, maybe you might want to think about doing some sort of more comedic, or at least disorganized crime. I'm enchanted with disorganized crime now, I have to say. It's really got me.
We can talk about it at dinner.
We'll
figure that out.
He's let out the reason that authors always come here. It's about dinner.
We're very well
dinner
fed.
Before or dinner after. I know it's a complete package, which is another reason to fight to get on the plane. Actually, he sent a photo. He posted a photo today of himself on Instagram in the cabin, with a selfie. And I thought, this is a man who's really missed flying.
It's not. I don't miss flying per se. I miss this, right? So there's all that stuff I have to do to get to do this.
Have you started checking to see which kind of airplane you're on?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. I know. Airbus is the winner at the moment.
Yeah,
I know. I've really thought about that.
I don't want to be in the one where they left the bolts out.
Apparently more than one, as it all turns out.
Yes.
No, I know. Yeah. Anyway, so what else can we talk about? Did you go to Chicago in January to research this book? Give yourself the full experience?
Oh, yeah. No, I always like to go to the places that I'm researching, because there are, it's always different, right? Google only gets you so far. And I'm really interested in sort of the visceral details of kind of what you see. So I wrote a book that was set in mostly in Denver, and going to Denver, I didn't realize how much of a frontier town it is. It really feels like you stand in the east-west roads are so wide, and you can see the Flatiron, you see the Rockies at the end, and it just feels like, and it's right on the edge of the plains. And so to sort of capture that, I wouldn't have known that was a thing, let alone know that it was something that could be captured. And so in this, it's sort of that, how winter sort of, well, you may or may not know, you Wisconsin folks know, how winter kind of compresses a city. The roads get narrower as the snow piles up. And driving through this is a not a very good neighborhood that they're cruising around in. And so to see what those storefronts are and how many of them are actually occupied, and it gives the book a flavor that I think you wouldn't get if I had done all my research from my office chair.
So here's another thing about winter, which we seldom endure here in Phoenix. And I read about this today. It was an article, I can't remember, it might have been about airports and navigating them in either the Republic or the Wall Street Journal this morning. Unfortunately, we don't get the New York Times on Monday. I try to get all three, so I have a constantly balanced picture. But anyway, because it's so cold, people are wearing many more clothes, and therefore they're moving slower, and therefore moving through the airport, everything gets clogged up in TSA, because you have to stand and strip at TSA, and they don't care. And so I hadn't thought about that, but it slows everything down when people are all bundled up.
Well, sure, and you have to, people are driving, partway into the opposite lane because there's so much crud, and like especially in the city in Chicago, people park on the street, so they might dig themselves out, but not everybody's digging themselves out.
Plus, if you step off the curb in New York, you can go down to your knee, in water, slush, snow, whatever it is, So, I mean, even walking becomes more hazardous. So you brought that into the book.
Sure. Yeah. And part of so there's a lot of, I don't say there's a lot of weather. There's a lot of winter in this book, I guess I'll say.
Mm-hmm. That's because you were missing your January slot.
Apparently so.
Right.
Apparently so. But it's fun to, again, sort of to create that atmosphere.
Sure.
So what happens when it's really cold? You get sort of claustrophobic. You spend way too much time in your house. You're sort of hunched up, and so I wanted to sort of convey kind of all of that.
Right, you
Stuff.
even eat differently. It's like soup
Sure.
weather or something like
Right.
that. So we haven't talked about the bad guy, because who in fact went to upstate Wilson and took the diaries, burned down his house. He makes a miraculous escape. So who's doing it? So you have actually a bad guy who we can talk about, and then there's a kind of possibly shadowy other bad guy.
Well, this is a book with a couple of different bad guys.
Yes,
Yeah,
it is.
and I like to keep I like to keep some mystery. Somebody described me the books that I write as thrillers with a mystery in the middle, because I don't want to tell you everything. There are some writers who write thrillers who I'm a big fan of, but you know who the bad guy is, early on, and you know what their motivation is, you know what their plan is. They're Iranians, and they want to nuke New York. So you sort of already know what the stakes are, and you know who the bad guys are, and it's all about how it gets stopped. But I love mystery, so I love that sort of, and I think it's one of the things that keeps people turning the pages is because, well, now wait a minute, what's happening? You keep getting sucked in, and you learn a little bit more. And your brain starts to churn to think about what else did I learn that might apply here. So to me, that's part of the fun, is to kind of have these layers of, kind of events and villains. Another friend of mine told me, I'm not a big video game person, but told me it was like, there's the small boss and the medium boss and the big boss that you beat at the end of the. So I don't know.
Listen, even the first Reacher, The Killing Floor, was like that.
Yeah.
He didn't know when he rode into the little Georgia town on the bus. He didn't know about the bad guys. So it was a mystery that was only revealed at the end. Now it's, much more antagonist. Well, not always even. But to have a thriller, you have to have a protagonist and an antagonist. But there's nothing that says you can't have, like, a second antagonist or even possibly two protagonists. It depends on what point of view, you want to take.
Well, sure, and that's, it's like jazz or the blues, where there's a form, and all of the artistry comes in with the variations that you provide within that form. There are these tropes in crime fiction, right? Like there's the bad guy buddy, right? There are all of these, and if you read enough of this, you know what these are. But to sort of the goal is to make it seem and feel new along the way, while still sort of staying mostly faithful to not to expectations so much, but to the form itself. A crime novel, whether you think about it as a mystery or a thriller, or for me, sort of the crime novel is kind of the umbrella. I just finished the latest Dennis Lehane, which I don't know if you've read.
You mean the one that came out last April
Well,
that we
okay, it's
did the
not
book
well.
launch for? Yes, I actually read it.
It's the latest for me, because
Sorry, I just couldn't
read it.
resist.
But he is such an eloquent writer,
Yeah.
but you get into it and it's like, oh, this is absolutely a crime novel. Like you think it's a, I don't know what you think, this is sort of an American novel, but he's still, the machinery is still in there, and it still just sucks you right in and pulls you through it. It's so at its, I mean, I think that's some of that book, especially Small Mercies, is among the finest thing I've read in years.
Oh, Dennis is an amazing writer.
Yeah.
Not afraid to tackle, all sorts of things.
Maybe you could convince him to write another book.
Well, I'll detour here because I happen to have this discussion with him. Right now, because he has young children, he can write, he said, I still remember, he said he could write a screenplay while he's babysitting the children or sitting in the car outside of school or, whatever it is. He doesn't need to really focus all that much, but to write a novel, he becomes so immersed in it that the whole world goes away and he's then not able to look after his kids or do all these other things because or the novel suffers or his family suffers or whatever. So right now he's sticking to screenplays because they're easy for him, comparatively speaking. He didn't say that he would never go back to writing novels, but he's come to parenthood late. And, so that's taking up his time at the moment.
Well, that's the right level of priorities, right? Is to
Yeah, absolutely. No quarrel. But it was an interesting, I thought it was intriguing that he could write screenplays, so easily, and found writing a novel to be so deep, immersive, that it was harder for him to do that. Anyway, let's go back to your first bad guy, the one that we meet early on. And he's clearly a hired gun, right? So because he is, in fact, a professional assassin, you have to give him some background on how he got to be that way. So that's kind of fun.
Well, it is kind of fun. I like bad guys. I love writing bad guys because, there's a saying in crime fiction that, that even the villain is the hero in their own mind. So to find the sort of the human part of them, even if it's sort of twisted and strange, is a lot of fun. And to sort of present them on a page in a way that kind of seems normal, and you just get a little farther in and a little farther in, and suddenly you're in the middle of this worldview that you might find a little disturbing. It's just like having a conversation with a stranger, and suddenly they're saying these things. And so I think a good villain is really important. And that's the other reason why I like to have two, because it's, hey, if one is good, two is better.
Well, he has to be a really good villain to have both Lewis and Peter after him and, not catching him at the first wrong move. So we'll leave him there. But one more thing, because we keep talking about guys. And I mentioned earlier the importance of the, computer genius, whatever it is. So you brought in June, and fortunately she has research skills.
She does. Well, and that's one of the things about being a journalist is that you subscribe to certain databases, you have access to things. Some of them, it's almost like you can't get police records necessarily, but journalists always have their resources. And that's one of June's things that June adds to this crew, and that's why she's really part of this team with Peter and Lewis, is because she both adds to that, and she gets afraid, but she knows what the value in what they're doing. So she's willing to put herself at risk. And in this book, she's become a little bit of an adrenaline junkie. So there's a passage where she talks with Dinah, Lewis's wife, who's also very much in this book. So we also get to see sort of Lewis and his marital life, and Lewis and his relationship with his kids, which was a lot of fun to do. But Dinah was like, so why do you keep showing up for this? And June's explanation was, it's worth the price you pay.
The title, was that your title, or did your publisher fasten upon it?
We had many long, ugly conversations about the title. The harder the writing of the book, the worse the conversation about the title is. The one thing I learned with this book was to never give myself a working title. because it's sort of it's the name of the document. It's sort of how I think of the book. And I had a working title, which I will not tell you, which they said no, absolutely not. It doesn't make any sense. Well, it made great sense to me. Um, but so that is the one of the lessons I learned from this
Sure.
book.
Mostly I see Untitled Peter Ash #9 will be the way this book will come to me while everybody's trying to figure it out. The next book, not this book. I love that. I do have one other, I'm having a mental blank here. What was I going to say? Well, take a question from the audience while I think
Sure.
about it.
Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
That might be what you were forgetting that you wanted to do was Barbara put a link on the novella you did for
Lewis and his backstory. Right. Tell us about the mystery.
Oh yeah. Thank you.
because-
So the 5 months worth of work that I threw out, I sort of there was a core to it that I really loved, and so that became this novella. It's about a sixth of a novel. It's about 16,000 words, and it's Lewis in the past. And it's funny that you brought up Donald Westlake because I realized that it's a lot like a Parker novel. There's humor, there are other pieces to it, but it really is career criminals at their work, and what the consequences are of that, and what the moral variations are of that. So I really like it, and so you can find it, Mystery Tribune. It's published in Mystery Tribune, which you can. Their website is Mystery Tribune, and you can.
That's what I put the link in, so you could
Yeah,
go there.
and you can buy it there in paper form or in ebook form if you're an e-reader.
Right. Thank you. That was actually what I was thinking about. So, other questions from the audience? Isn't this great? She comes so often and always sits here that we have a sort of mind meld thing going on. Right.
Yes, sir.
Have you written or plan on writing something other than Peter Ash?
That's actually what I'm working on right now. I am. I had to twist my publisher's arm. I am almost done with a standalone set in southwestern Wisconsin in what's called the Driftless region. So it's kind of a very geologically unusual part of the country, and it's it's a little Appalachian. They use the terminology that they use in Appalachia. So there are hollows and it's both. It's a dairy farming region, and there are no sort of corporate farms. It's all very small holdings, a lot of poverty. There's also kind of it's not far from Madison, Wisconsin, so there's kind of this hippy-dippy element, and there are a bunch of retirees. So it's sort of a melting pot rural place. And because Peter is such a peripatetic person, I wanted to write about somebody who was rooted in a place. So there's a guy named Bobby Cruikshank who has recently gotten out of prison, and he is trying to live his life on the straight and narrow. I also wanted to write about somebody who wasn't necessarily a hero, but somebody who maybe could be, but somebody who certainly is not, as the book begins. But so he's doing his best, but he comes from a family of criminals, basically, except for his little brother, Paul, who kind of got out. And Paul ends up dead in the parking lot of a roadhouse, stabbed to death. And the county sheriff really has no idea. It was a very clean murder, basically. And so Bobby decides that he really needs to know what happened to his brother Paul. Paul is 11 years younger, and Bobby kind of raised him in a way. So there's a lot of, there's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of, kind of heart, but there's also suspense and a little bit of craziness and a lot of family complications. So the goal is that it be a world that is recognizable to fans of Peter Ash. It is that same sort of working class, ideally, hopefully, fully developed characters, complex relationships, a little bit of, moral gray area, which is always something I'm interested in. So now I just have to finish the damn thing.
So, it's good to give your four protagonists in this book, Lois and Dinah and Peter and June, a break because they've had such a harrowing experience and all that. It doesn't, and I'm serious about that. You don't ever want your characters to be so Teflon that, they bounce back from terrible trauma and you'd think like it never happened. But that does also bring to mind one thing I did want to mention also, that you've done a great job with Peter and, the PTSD that he suffers. And you've pointed out resources for people with that in the back of the book. There's a note in the back of the book. And thank you for the shout out, by the way. But, I think that's been an important part of what you've done, is to bring that in the Northwoods book that I mentioned, the Amy Peace book, the debut, that Ken Kruger and I did. Her character also is suffering from PTSD, and he comes back and his mom is the sheriff of this little community. And I think Jeff Parker wrote a book, at least one, about somebody who's come home from the war. And,
Yeah.
I think it's good that you guys are writing about that, because I'm a Vietnam War widow, and so I don't know how it would have been if he had come home from Vietnam. But so many people, suffered so afterward, and nobody ever want to talk about it. So if it's actually made it into mainstream fiction now, then it's become a topic that people can discuss.
Well, it's interesting to sort of the evolution of it. But I started writing about it because I had customers. I was a freelance building inspector. So if you bought a house, you would hire a guy like me to tell you what was wrong with it. And it was after the surge in Iraq that I had customers who were coming home who were, they'd come home from war. And just because of some strange quirk of who I am, people tell me strange things. It's a wonderful asset for a writer. I'll tell you that much. But when you're in the army and you've been in combat, you don't really have anybody to talk to because your family of origin, right? Your parents, your siblings, your spouse, your kids. You don't really want to burden them with that. You might not necessarily feel super proud of some of the things that you've done or seen, or maybe you just went through so much horrible stuff that you don't want to burden them with that. You're just going to carry that yourself. And on the other side, your military community, your military family, that's all about toughness. It's all about sucking it up, and pain is just weakness leaving the body, and not showing your real feelings, not being vulnerable. And so, I'm this curious, chatty guy who shows up to tell them what's wrong with their house. And, the spouse and the in-laws are upstairs measuring for curtains, and I'm down in the basement looking at the furnace. And some guy's wearing an army t-shirt, or he's got a tattoo, or he may have a prosthetic limb. And I said, so you were in the army? And then, often that was all it took. And oh, I was here, and and I heard the most amazing stories, and that was what got me started, was realizing that just because I read the news about the what was happening overseas, I hadn't put enough thought into what it was like to come home, and I was really interested in that and in these young men and women who we had gone to ask to fight these wars, who had no idea what they were in for, no idea. And it's really since The Drifter came out, folks have been coming out of the woodwork to talk to me about it. It's really an interesting thing, and it's something I did not at all anticipate. I was actually sort of terrified when the book was going to come out. I was feeling like, who am I to write this story? But to have people say, how did you know what it feels like in my head? How did you know? I call it the white static too. Like that, I thought I just made that up. Like that came out of somewhere. But the messages that I get on social media or emails or whatever are astonishing. And so it's to be a part of that was not something I never anticipated. But it's a really kind of an amazing piece of this for me.
I think you've done a very good thing there. So, any more questions from the audience?
Yes, sir.
Can you interrupt this book for using the word coolie?
Yes.
Big around.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's the area just sort of south of La Crosse.
Patrick, you've emerged, so I'm guessing.
Uh-oh.
we have a few, virtual questions.
Let's see here. Where is it? I'm sorry. Okay, Robin would like to know what does your average writing day look like?
Oh, sure. A perfect writing day is I actually wake up early, and I do a little exercise. I go for a walk. I go for a run. I go for a swim. I meditate. I found that has really helped me through the pandemic, and I've sort of stuck with it. It makes me less crazy, which is a fine thing. And then I make my breakfast and a pot of coffee, and I just bring the whole thing into my office. And I start work, and I sort of treat it like a work day. I try to be there till 5. I might go for a walk after lunch or go for a walk if I get stuck. I have found that to be super helpful, and I'm interested in sort of the neuroscience of creativity, and exercise actually is a big creativity boost. So if you get stuck, go, do some push-ups, go for a walk, and any of that stuff. And being outdoors also helps. So I'm always better in the morning. So that's kind of if it's noon and I haven't done anything, I'm in trouble.
How long do you meditate for?
20 minutes usually. So I'm not a super guru. I'm just a.
Do you use a Insight timer or any of those?
I've tried a bunch of different apps, and I sort of, and a bunch of different guided meditations, and it really helped me get going, but now I find it all annoying. So I don't even set a timer. Yeah. But I have found it to be really instructive because it helps you to pay attention to what's going on in your head. And I got into this because this is something that veterans do to help with post-traumatic stress. I was like, well, the pandemic is driving me insane. I should really try this. And it helps you see your thoughts, right? It helps you, and so it also helps me work because I'll be sitting in the morning trying to, think of nothing and to follow my breath, and the book shows up, hey, what if you did this? And so, I say, thank you, brain. That's not what I'm doing right now, but don't forget that. But so, yeah, that's a weird part of my life now. Oh, look at those hands. Yes, ma'am.
Why do you live in Milwaukee?
Well, I grew up in Milwaukee. My mom still lives in Milwaukee. My brother and sister are in Chicago, and my wife works at the university. So, UWM. So we are. We have pretty deep ties in the community, and we love to travel. We go all over, but Milwaukee's also just a great town. It's a very livable place.
You go to Summerfest?
When I was a much younger man, I went to Summerfest. I think those days are over for me. Summerfest is the world's largest music festival. It's 10 days, or around July 4th. What?
It was 10 days.
Yeah. Well, I think it's back to, yeah. But the whole city changes. There are places you can't go because there's just too much going on. There are people who rent out their house. So anyway, I love Milwaukee, and Milwaukee's been good to me too. So, yes, sir.
You ever find when you're writing, you kind of get off on a tangent on something, and you get there and you say it doesn't work, but you put it aside and say maybe the next book it'll fit in?
No, I try not to save stuff per se. That I have a trick for this, right? I absolutely think that, and I absolutely want to say where can I shoehorn this in next, but it's a trap. And so the trick I have to trick myself out of this is I copy it and I move it to the very end of the document, and then I forget about it. And I know if I ever need it again, I know where it is, but I never need it again. And every time I try to do something like that, it takes forever and it's never right. So I kind of have a list of sort of ideas or it's a note card with a couple of words on it typically. So that's kind of what I do with that kind of stuff.
But you ever save your note cards and say,
Oh yeah, no, I'll go back. Yeah, I go.
here, but I'm going to use it in the next
Well, I always think I might use it, but I tend to, if I do, it's always in a very abstract form. It's nothing that you would necessarily recognize, but I have stacks of note cards, and when I finish a book, I start to flip through to sort of be like, so what was I thinking about? And as I come to the end of a book, I'm already thinking about the next book. So that's sort of my in-between books process. As I clean my office and I kind of go through my note cards and I, clean off my giant bulletin board and, you sort of,
Reboot.
yeah.
Yeah, definitely so. Is there a last?
Yes, ma'am.
So you're writing your standalone now, and then is that going to follow with another Peter Ash? So is there going to be another gap before there's another Peter Ash?
My hope, in my head, there's another Peter Ash. My publisher may have a different idea. But one of the interesting things, so I needed a break from these characters in this world, but it didn't take very long for me to realize how much I love these characters and how much of me is in these books. And as far as I'm concerned, I will be writing Peter Ash until, the day before I die. But I do want to stretch. I want to try new things, and you want to have something else. Like if there are readers who are like, well, maybe this is not for me, right? I don't like the veteran piece. I think I do get stuff every once in a while. I would never have picked up a book about a Marine, but then I started reading and. So I'm trying to find a way to have a conversation with the people who would never pick up a book about a Marine. And to talk about kind of different kinds of things as well. So but
Never say never. Never say never
Yeah.
to a writer.
Yeah.
It doesn't work out that way. Right? Yes, ma'am.
How often do you read other people's books? Daily, weekly, never?
daily. I go through phases where I hate everything, and that's not about what I'm reading. It's about me. So I just can't read fiction. So then I turn to nonfiction. So actually, C.J. Box and I will trade book recommendations because he reads a lot of nonfiction. And so I've been diving a little bit more into that. But I came to this as a reader. This was reading was my happy place all the way through my childhood. I read a book a day in high school. I didn't have that much of a social life, so. My wife still likes to tease me because, like, if my friends wanted to go to the football game, I was not remotely interested in football, and so I would bring my book because I wanted to hang out with my friends, but there was no way I was going to pay attention to that. So now, of course, Margaret's a Packers fan, so I have become a Packers fan. But
Okay. Well, I want to thank you all very much for coming tonight. It's so great to see Nick again. I know we've all missed him, so thank you for coming.
well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you guys for braving the weather to come out.
Now, I have a book to give away, which is set in Boston, but it's freezing in January, so it's kind of akin. And anyway, it's a stylish debut thriller, it says here.